In this video, we will be going over the different approaches or perspectives in psychology, which just simply mean ways that we explain behavior. There are 7 of these approaches that we will look at. The first perspective is the psychoanalysis or psychodynamic approach or perspective. According to psychoanalysis, our thoughts and our actions come from unconscious thoughts, so thoughts that we're completely unaware of are driving our behavior, as well as early childhood experiences. So things that happen to us when we are very young can come back and influence our personality or character later in life. Sigmund Freud is the psychologist who came up with the psychodynamic or psychoanalysis perspective. So according to the psychoanalytic or psychoanalysis perspective, you're looking at unconscious thoughts and childhood experiences driving your behavior or your thoughts. So let's say you have a 3rd grade boy, and all of a sudden he starts being very negative to his best friend, picking fights and teasing him. Although the child is unaware of what's really causing it. When you ask, why are you doing that? The child just says, I don't know. So a psychoanalyst would have the child use free association and say whatever comes to mind, trying to piece together from what the child is saying, trying to figure out what is really going on unconsciously that the child is unaware of. Perhaps his best friend just started to get a lot of new possessions, and secretly that 3rd grade boy is jealous of him and is acting out, but he is completely unaware of it because it's unconscious. It's his unconscious that's driving his behavior. Another explanation for our behavior and our thoughts would be childhood experiences. So here you can see on this slide, if a man has intimacy issues and cannot form relationships with others, the psychoanalytic perspective would say perhaps something happened to this person when he was a very young child. Maybe he was bullied, and later on, he fears getting close to others. The second perspective is a behaviorist perspective or behaviorist approach, sometimes called behaviorism. This is learning something that has happened to us in our environment and altering our behavior. For example, if you have your driver's license and you drive around a particular town or city, you learn to understand from experience where police officers usually sit, and you alter your behavior in those locations and start to drive slower. So that's what a behaviorist is looking at. Our actions stem from some experience that we've had, that we've learned from. When we look at the chapter in learning, we will be talking about many different behaviorists. I have 3 of them listed here. John Watson, who is the founder of behaviorism, Ivan Pavlov, as well as B.F. Skinner. In the scenario you see on the slide, if a man has intimacy issues and cannot form relationships with others, a behaviorist is not looking at early childhood experiences or unconscious thoughts, but just simply what experience did this person have that they've learned from. So perhaps this man, he met a girl, he was very interested in her, but then she rejected him. Due to that experience that he had, he learned that women can be hurtful, therefore he is afraid to develop relationships with others later in life. The third perspective or approach is the cognitive approach. Cognitive means higher mental processes. This is your thought process. So according to the cognitive approach, our thoughts and our behaviors come from how we assess or think about a situation that we're in. And that is always changing. But our thought process drives our behavior. So if you think that your friend is upset with you for some reason, you might start changing your behavior and giving them the cold shoulder. based on your thoughts about that situation will alter your behavior in return. So for the example we've been looking at, if a man has intimacy issues and cannot form relationships with others, that could be due to some thought that the man has. Perhaps the woman that he likes, he thinks is too classy for him or better than he is. Therefore, he may not ask her out. So again, his thoughts are driving his behavior. The fourth approach or perspective is the biological perspective, or neuroscience. From this perspective, we try to explain behavior or thoughts being based on something that's occurring inside your body, some physiological or biological process. For example, a lot of people who suffer from depression tend to have low levels of serotonin. That would be what a neuroscientist would look at. What is happening inside the body that is affecting your behavior or your thoughts? If someone starts acting rude or nasty towards other people, a biological psychologist would look at the different chemicals inside the body or the parts of the brain. Do they have a concussion? Is there an alteration in hormones or electrolytes? So is there something physical or physiological that's driving one's behavior? The fifth approach is an evolutionary approach or evolutionary perspective. According to this perspective, many of the traits, actions, thoughts that we have evolved from our ancient ancestors through natural selection, which means through reproduction and survival. So dominant traits will survive and be passed on to our offspring. The weaker traits will die off. Survival of the fittest. For example, back in caveman times, going back to our ancient ancestors, men were the providers. They were more prone to be engaging in things that dealt with violent behavior, fighting off predators, going out and hunting. And women were more likely to stay at home and be the nurturers, taking care of the children. The men who were able to fight off predators and hunt and kill prey survived and passed on those dominant aggressive genes to their offspring. Those who couldn't were weak and died off. Therefore, today, as an entire world population, men tend to be more aggressive than females. So it's something that's bred in us and we commonly share with people throughout the world. So the difference between biological and evolutionary approach, a lot of students mix these up. A biological approach is looking at an individual. What is physically going on inside of this person that's causing some abnormal behavior? Evolutionary approach is looking at traits that we share with others worldwide. For example, women are more nurturing and men are more aggressive. Those were the dominant traits that have been passed on from generation to generation to generation through natural selection. The sixth perspective is the humanistic approach, or otherwise known as humanism. A humanist looks at our self-esteem, our self-image. So a lot of our thoughts and actions come from the way we feel about ourselves. People who have a more positive self-image or self-esteem will be more outgoing, more confident, more independent. And again, from yesterday's lesson, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow are your two humanists. So here they're looking at self-growth, self-awareness. So here, going back to the intimacy issue, if a man has intimacy issues and cannot form relationships with others, a humanist might think, well, the way they feel about themselves, their self-image, their self-esteem can be affecting their judgment or their behavior. So they may think they're worthless, they're not good enough, have poor self-image, therefore they're not confident or independent enough to try and go out and ask someone out and form some sort of significant relationship. The seventh perspective is the social cultural perspective or approach. So from this perspective, a lot of our behaviors come from customs or social norms that we have learned in our particular social setting or our culture. For example, some people, when they meet, they shake hands, others bow, others kiss. In some cultures, being emotional is acceptable. In other cultures, it's seen as a weakness. So from this perspective, they're trying to explain a lot of the behaviors that we have are due to the culture or social setting that we live in. And finally, a more contemporary approach is a three-prong approach. Whenever we try to assess someone's behavior, many psychologists look at three different aspects. Are there any biological explanations? Is there anything physically going on with this person that could be causing this particular behavior? Or what about the social setting in which they live in? Could it be their culture or their friends or their social setting? And also psychological influences, analyzing the thought process and how they are assessing particular situations at that time.